My first response when anybody asks me if pricing is going up or down, or whatever prediction they ask me, and I know a lot of brokers out there are thinking the same thing when clients ask them, what do they say? Welcome to the Dirt Podcast. I'm Miles Solomon. Every week, I share my perspective on commercial real estate and the business of trading dirt. Let's get into it.
Nothing in this podcast is legal, tax, or investment advice. It's for entertainment only, loosely inspired by real estate, and any resemblance to actual people, deals, or outcomes is accidental or aggressively fictionalized. Talk to your attorney, CPA, and advisors before acting on anything you hear.
I've been talking a lot about everything but dirt so far in this podcast. Today, I'm going to focus on the nitty-gritty of land brokerage and my thoughts on the land market right now in Los Angeles. So 2 years ago, I sent an email to my clients called the Bullwhip Effect. It was supposed to be the first of a 12-part series. It was like a concise 5-paragraph email on my views of the market at the time and then predictions for the future. Hubert Humphrey was asked how long it would take him to prepare a 15-minute talk, and he said a week. Asked how long it would take for a 2-hour talk, and he said, I'm ready right now. Blaise Pascal said, I would have written a shorter letter, but did not have the time. I think a lot of people think that was Mark Twain. I had to look that one up. So that letter I sent was like the opposite of this podcast. It was also the first and last of that 12-part series. It just took way too long to write. So I'm not sure if it's in good taste, but I'm going to quote myself in that letter. The virus, coupled with the large-scale monetary stimulus from successive administrations, triggered an acceleration in the shift of consumer behavior from in-person to online spending. The result, a surge in online purchases, leading to an increased demand for storage and distribution facilities. Put simply, more people bought a lot more crap in ways they didn't as much previously, and the people who sold, manufactured, and distributed that crap bought more buildings and land to house it. Commercial real estate and logistics have delayed responses to the economy. So good or bad economic events, the delays take a long time to filter through logistical and real estate supply chains. That's just the nature of the beast. And there are smarter people who could probably talk for an eternity about why that is. It's definitely to do with psychology. That's the psychology of, buyers and sellers of real estate, owners of real estate and businesses. It's psychology of consumer spending behaviors. It's monetary policy. It's a lot of things. But the point is that it takes a long time to see the effects of what's going on right now in the economy. And we didn't see that anywhere more prominently than during COVID. So my first response when anybody asks me if pricing is going up or down, or whatever prediction they ask me, and I know a lot of brokers out there are thinking the same thing when clients ask them, what do they say? Because you want to give them honest feedback, but a lot of times you don't know, or you don't want to say, hey, it's tanking, because that doesn't win you the listing, or at least that's the idea, I guess. I wouldn't be a broker, though, is what I say. I wouldn't be a broker. I'd be a billionaire if I knew the answer to that. That's my most common response to that question. So we don't know where exactly the market's going. I think brokers are in a unique position. They're closest to the market of anyone, besides the obvious, owners and business owners, property owners. But we get a unique perspective because we get scope and we get to see across the market and get really close to all that activity. Especially, one of the things that our team does that's fairly unique is we have every size of building and property and land. So we're interacting on a daily basis with users for 5,000 square feet or 500,000 square feet. And we interact and we do deals on both ends of that spectrum. There's a tendency, I think, for a lot of brokers, the further they get into the business, or if they're at a certain type of brokerage, to not bother with anything small. And so they have like I would say it's a limited, perhaps it's more expansive than my perspective on bigger stuff. but it's limited in the sense that they don't have their finger to the pulse on a lot of these things. So sometimes I'll have conversations with like buddies at bigger companies or who solely focus on like whale hunting. And I don't think that they have a really good sense of what like the common man's doing. And they probably don't give a fuck. I mean, honestly speaking, because, you know, the common saying is that you have to do the same amount of work for a small deal as you do for a big one. And that's true. But like one of the things you get is you get to know where the market is and how business owners are looking, thinking. It's like a live feed of consumer or business sentiment. So I think that's important. And uh, so obviously we don't know where exactly the market's going, but any broker who can give a meaningful prediction on the market besides like it's going down or it's going up. It'd be like if you're on a sinking ship and you're like, oh, yep, the ship is sinking. You know, if you can give beyond that, you're probably too smart to be a broker, and you should become a principal or like an oracle of some type. For the rest of us, though, knowing what we know about the bullwhip effect, so that delay between the economy and our business, we can kind of look at the tea leaves of the economy and the political environment, consumer attitudes, business owner attitudes, property owner attitudes, and just apply that bullwhip effect to all of those factors. And then we can look at local trends and patterns and market specific information that we all have. And we can combine that with your knowledge of the world today, and you get a pretty good sense of like where things are going. I don't know if that sense is scientific enough to advise people on multi-million, $100 million acquisitions and deals. But to some extent, that is the witchcraft in commercial real estate is, nobody has all the answers. You could put a room full of brokers, or you could put a room full of brokers together and each one of them might have a different opinion. But likely someone's going to be more right than someone else. And I think, that's one good way of getting closer to the truth. I got into land because the first requirement I ever had in this business was for a company called Badger Daylighting. And that was like a company that I used to walk the streets of Vernon every day. I probably did that I know I did it every day for at least 5 months. I don't think I was as consistently doing it every day after that, but there was 8 hours a day for 5 months. All I did was walk. And it was in the summer when I started. So it was like 105 degrees, concrete and asphalt everywhere. It was just walking down one street and then walking down the opposite side of that street and walking down the next street. And every day was like that. And I found this company through that cold calling, literally knocking on doors. And I think I went in there and I said, hey, my name is Miles. I'm a commercial real estate broker, just in the neighborhood, and wanted to check in with you guys, see if you're looking for anything, or introduce myself. And I ended up working with the field manager for Southern California of that company for probably 6 months. Now, at the time, I didn't know any better. I didn't know how to, they were qualified from the sense that they were a huge company. But as you get further in the business, for one, you're not working with just one company. But secondly, you're qualifying the person that you're working with to make sure that they're the right person to be talking to. And so, as we'll see, I didn't do any of those things. So I worked with this group for probably 6 months. And I probably showed that guy like 25 different yards in person, 25 different meetings. And at the time, right before COVID, around 2019, land wasn't really a big deal. And it wasn't really being talked about that much. This group needed an acre with heavy zoning where they could store trucks and machinery. And I used to sit in front of my computer, same thing I do today, but this is where it started. And on one side of the screen, because at that time I didn't have multiple monitors. One side of the screen, I'd have a satellite map. And then on the other side of the screen, I'd have a GIS map pulled up of the zoning. And I'd be just looking for that sweet spot where like vacant lots match the right zoning. And then I'd call those owners up and tell them what I was working on and looking for. And I learned pretty quickly that there's not that much land available meeting those requirements. So I worked for those guys for probably 6 months unofficially. Of course, I didn't have anything in writing. I was sending them things. I was touring them through things. I was just kind of going with what I thought. But I think at the end of 6 months, after 25 tours, the guy said, "Hey, management's decided that they're going to go in a different direction." And it turned out that that entire time I was working with them, the company actually had exclusive representation through another company, and it was just wasting my time. But what I got from that was I was cold calling for a specific reason these different owners, and I actually met through that process and through one of those tours a client who's still one of my great clients, and it also opened the door to land. So just because I didn't know better doesn't mean that the result didn't end up being good anyway. I learned that there's several elements that go into land that are extremely simple. It's land, but it's also incredibly nuanced and easy to overlook these details. These details are what makes it, as a subcategory of commercial real estate, the most fragmented, hazy, and easy to overestimate. So I do think a lot of people laugh when they hear that I do industrial, primarily just industrial land in LA, because it's such a simple thing, and people look around LA and they're like, what land? What are you talking about? But it is complicated. Like, at least for me, I think it's much more complicated than people think. So first off, there's zoning. So you have your base zoning, which is like the face value zoning. So that's your first look at zoning. And then that tends to be industrial, for what we're talking about. So they'll call it M1, M2, MR1, MR2, LACM1, LACM2. And the county and the city, they have their own designations for what each of these zoning codes mean. LA County unincorporated, that's areas where the county zoning rules versus local cities with their own zoning code has its own zoning code as well. So on one street, you regularly have two different zonings. So you could have a building on one side and a building on the other, or a piece of land on one, a piece of land on the other, with entirely different zoning codes. But there's areas in the city and the county of like these crossroads where you might have four different zoning classifications on the same street. Like, imagine a four-way intersection, and each corner of the intersection has its own zoning code that goes from there all the way back into whichever city or county that is. So you could have LA County M2, LA City M1, Compton Industrial, etc., like on one intersection. So that first level of zoning just tells you right off the bat what you can and can't do. And a lot of brokers just stop there and they go, okay, it's M1, M2. They look at the code, and that's what it is. That's what you can do. You see the code and it says you can do this, that, you can't do this, and that's it. But in reality, the fun, at least here in LA, does not stop there. All of these municipalities have basically created cheat codes. They're really ways to cheat businesses and property owners out of their property rights, but obviously they don't view it that way. So the thing is that every municipality in California, to my knowledge, is required to have a general plan. The general plan is like a charter or constitution of what the city stands for, what its zoning is about, what its land use designations are, all of that. They are really complex, and these general plans take a long time to make. Some of these general plans took 10, 20 years to make. They're really complicated, long documents. And what you see now is that within that, or next to these general plans, there's something called a specific plan. And specific plans have been around for a while. I'm not sure exactly when they started. At some point, I'll get a zoning expert on here and someone that can really talk in detail. But the point is that there are dozens and dozens of these specific plans around LA. And the specific plans talk about specific areas, the zoning, the land use, the city's vision and guidance on development, etc. The way I view a specific plan is like a mesh within the general plan. It's like a miniature general plan, but for a specific area. So there's some areas, some properties where they'll have a specific plan that might be like a 50-page document. I literally have a listing for one of these where it only applies to 5 properties. The entire specific plan is written around 5 properties. Madeline, I'm looking at you. 7815 Somerset is one of those specific plans. So you have these like specific plans or overlays depending on what it is, and there's other complicated, and it goes on and it goes on. So you might have like M3 zoning, the heaviest zoning in LA County. I always joke, M3 LA County is as close to Texas as you can get from LA. And it allows car dismantlers, recycling plants, concrete batch plants, all the other things that a population needs to sustain itself, like the real nitty gritty dark side of society that no one wants to think about. But, LA County M3, that's where those things happen. LA County M2, that's where a lot of those things happen. But then that M3 zoning could have an overlay. And a huge one that got passed a bit ago in LA County M3 is called the green zone. So that's an entire plan. It's an overlay that applies to probably 1,000 properties, maybe more. And many of those properties, if not most, previously had M2 or M3 zoning. And what this green plan or green zone says is actually you can't do any of the things that you could previously do or what you can do on the face value zoning of M3 or M2. Or if you can do them, you need to go through, pretty extensive conditional use permit process, which, is basically could take years. Or even if it takes 6 months, which it doesn't, it takes longer. It makes it very difficult to lease or sell property because you don't know the answer. You have no by right uses pretty much at all. So what they'll do is they'll put in these specific plans, they'll put like uses that they want to see, some reflection of like an idea. So they'll put like, I swear to God, they'll put like candle manufacturing. I swear to God, there's a zoning code that says candle manufacturing. Or you'll have it in some random area and it will say like aerospace manufacturing, or it's these specific plans are mostly like reflections of like hopes and dreams of planners. Like it has nothing to do with reality. It's things that either create jobs or create tax revenue for the city because they do, tax the gross receipts sales or whatever it is. But, these specific plans, they're not, and I'm not saying this in hyperbole, they're really not very correlated to reality as far as what you can do, what people want to do, what the demand is. So what happened is that a lot of these municipalities realized that if they wanted to start making more specific changes to zoning into areas, whether it's politically motivated, in a lot of cases, most cases it is, they talk about environmental justice, or they talk about, other things, but it might not even be that dark. It could be just that they want to see this area become a manufacturing place or whatever it is. But they realized that they could do things with specific plans that they couldn't do with their general plans. So they could restrict property rights and uses without affecting the general plan. And so, the thought process there is that a change to the general plan requires an environmental impact report, usually CEQA, and a shitload of other things. I mean, it costs several $1,000,000 depending on the scope of your general plan to overhaul it. And so everybody in government realized they could use these specific plans to implement the changes that they wanted to see without having to update their entire general plans. And the way that they would pass these, would be they'd be at the final yard line, and then they'd send out a 30-day notice right before they're going to vote. And even if business owners or property owners came, it was like so far down the road at that point, you really could not do much. And so in LA, all these municipalities started using the shit out of these specific plans. And there's some really complex issues like with this conversation for zoning. But as an overview of land, as like a category of commercial real estate, I think that covers enough zoning. So you have the first thing, which is zoning. And then you have location. Obviously, like all other assets of real estate, location matters, but not in the way that you think usually. The property's location is highly, highly, highly specific to the specific use of that potential buyer or tenant. So obviously, trucking companies here in Los Angeles need to be near the port, and they'll pay a premium for that. But it's not just that. It's not that simple. Specifically, drayage trucking companies, logistic companies that are moving through like goods through the port need to be close. A drayage company pulls containers off of a ship from the port and puts them back on the ship. Basically, they go from the warehouse, or they go from the ship to their yard, or from the ship to a warehouse, and that's their business. And so they'll pay a premium. But like an over-the-road trucking company, like a lot of the ones that you've heard of or that you see in the news, those companies with their millions of drivers that are doing long haul, the ones you see when you're on a road trip, those guys don't really care about the port. I mean, they don't need to be that close to the port, and they're not willing to pay a premium for that. And it might not even be a good thing because they got to deal with traffic and everything else. So they might care about things like their proximity to major freeways, arterial roads, distance from where their drivers live, different logistics facilities, warehouses, etc. So the same thing applies to vehicle storage, whether the vehicles are going overseas, whether they're going to go on rail, recycling, and so on and so on. So if it's a service business, it may be proximity to existing operations or to a competitor's location. So if that competitor is stronger, they might not want to open a location there because they don't want to compete. Or if that competitor is weaker, maybe there's a specific interest to go there. So there's a lot more subtlety to location in that sense. For a lot of these people, it's more like maybe more similar to retail than what regular industrial is in terms of location. Location matters in regular industrial, but there's a lot of subtlety in land that, people overlook. So then there are like site specific conditions to land. So things you can't imagine will turn potential lessees or buyers off. That could be the shape of the land. That's usually the first thing. A square is always preferred. You always hear people say, that they don't want any irregular shapes. Not for everybody, but for some people. The location of any existing structures within that shape is a big deal. So if you have a lot of land and then you've got a building, it really matters where that building is. There's big companies like Prologis that have massive, really beautiful yards and great locations, but they've got warehouses in the center, what we call a cross dock, a place that you can collect and distribute goods from, basically the goods go in on one side of the building, they go out on the other. And, even essentially at any rate, there's no market for that in some cases because the specific users that are looking for a cross dock, if they're not in the market, then there's nobody else. And then that asset becomes a huge liability. having a building in the center of your yard is a big problem. It destroys your circulation, so the flow of your trucks. Um, it can really affect how many trucks you can fit, right? Because you need turning radius for trailers. Um, so if you have a building in the center, it could cut your total volume in half. So a lot of times you'll see even institutional guys with land and they'll be saying, well, it's 6 acres or 7 acres and the rate's only X. And it's like, yeah, but you have a building in the middle. So your net usable for most people is way less than what you're advertising, because it's all about the utility of the land and how you can use it. So in addition to the shape, the entrance, how many entrances, what kind of entrances they are, the width of those entrances. I've had so many weird deals blow up because of stuff like that. Little details that, hard to predict. Um, and then you have like the type of the road that's next to the yard and the quantity of traffic on it. That could mean a really good thing for one business, or it could be an absolute like deal killer for another. If their trucks can't stop to safely pull in or can't safely pull out, uh, opening on arterial road could be a big deal. There's things like that where it's like, yeah, there's subtlety as I'm trying to get the point across. So, and then there's of course basic things like paving. Is it paved? Is it asphalt or concrete? Uh, this has become such a big part of my business that I've actually created my own kind of informal contracting business. And we do a lot of consulting. I have a lot of equipment and I work with some of my clients to do work for other clients on consulting and actually doing the physical work of uh, paving or resurfacing land or something, because there's a lot of like strategic questions that come into, is it asphalt or is it concrete, for businesses that are using the ground to like actually deck containers or put the containers on the ground, take them off the chassis and put them on the ground. Or if they have like, it's a lay down yard for pipes or equipment where you're actually putting that stuff on the asphalt, that's usually a no-go, because it just, companies uh, will run through, fully loaded trucks, for example, could chew through like 4 inches of asphalt in like a month, call it. So then it's concrete, and then it depends on the thickness of that, the weight of the machinery. So then you've got drainage. Where does the water go? Is it collected and treated on site? You have stormwater compliance in California. That's become really complicated. How you deal with water, and the list goes on and on. And so, as you can see, there's a lot of detail of land here, and there's a lot of subtlety. And the market is highly, highly specific to a number of variables. So lease rates are all over the board. I probably have 20 large land listings with pricing from 25 cents gross to $1 a foot gross. I've got a 7 acre yard that's at 25 cents, and I've got another, acre yard that's at $1, and I've comps to support both. It just depends on all those factors. So going back to my crystal ball for the future, I look at the number of factors specific to land and the regulatory environment that we're in and where it's going, or where I think politics are going, where I think everybody thinks politics are going here. And my prediction is that in the long term, great land with either grandfathered uses where you can do those uses for forever because they're already approved, or really strong zoning will eventually become like a priceless commodity, because it doesn't exist. The competition's so few, and the factors for what makes it valuable are so strong that I think that there's a lot of sites where eventually they'll be worth as much as a user can physically pay. But I think everything else, as far as land, will continue to drop. until it meets the common denominator of values. So that's like what at its base, what can you do with it in its most basic form? Like if it's building a new building, then it'll just come down to construction costs and the demand for that specific type of product that you're building, uh, and what they'll lease it at. So it's hard to make predictions, but I think as far as land goes in LA County, those are my predictions. And I hope you enjoyed an episode kind of deeper in the details.